Our guest this week is John Franklin, EASA's Head of Safety Promotion. John's love of aviation started at the age of 8 when his family got involved in hot air ballooning. He began his aviation career in the Royal Air Force, serving as an engineering officer on the Tornado aircraft, and then within the Military Aviation Authority. He joined EASA in 2011 in the Safety Analysis team, and in 2018 became EASA's Head of Safety Promotion. He leads their Together4Safety promotion initiative to help the European aviation community by providing practical information and support on a range of safety issues and other topics. John, you're very welcome to Squawk 7000. Lots to talk to you about in this particular episode, but I suppose before we do, let's share with the audience your actual role and what you do.
Yeah, so obviously I work at EASA, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, in Cologne in Germany. And for the last 3 years, I've been head of the safety promotion team at the agency. So it's quite a new kind of activity. I'd say we've always done safety promotion, but dare I say, very more traditional, let's make a PDF leaflet with experts type thing. So we set up a new team about 3 years ago to try and just get a bit more proactive and, try and really properly outreach into the different communities, not just in general aviation, but, helicopters, drones, the commercial sector as well, and kind of just try and do things a little bit differently, if that makes sense.
And when you think about it, I mean, aviation already has a fantastic reputation. The use of CRM training, crew resource training, the concepts of safety are out there. So what's your focus at the moment? Because for example, there been a little bit of a slip, or do we have a situation of rusty pilots?
So actually, that's one of our biggest focuses. So particularly, I guess, when the pandemic first started, obviously we were already looking to do before, when we weren't even thinking about COVID, when we didn't even know what a lockdown was. We were already looking at pilots who hadn't flown over the winter, so much over the winter, and how can we kind of help people across the community get ready for the upcoming season. And we were already starting to kind of look at how we could do that. And then obviously, come February, we suddenly found ourselves in this kind of extended break where nobody was flying. And then, we were really starting to work with people across the GA community about what does this mean for pilots? And, particularly that first summer in 2020, when a lot of people we know, even people in our own team who hadn't really flown much since October and were sat in May, June thinking, finally, I'm getting in the cockpit, and how am I going to feel when I'm back in the cockpit? And I think, obviously, thankfully, most people managed to get some flying in 2020, and then things got a little bit better in 2021. But that's certainly the biggest focus we've got at the moment is, we know lots of people in all sorts of different situations this past 2 years throughout the pandemic, and just how can we help people assess their own skills and where they are, see what tools we can give people just to kind of just get them thinking about the flying they're going to conduct over the next few months. I think that's really the big thing we're trying to do.
And I'm guessing too, I suppose, that for certainly the recreational pilots who might be listening to us, they might be a little bit anxious about regulation and very strict overview. In other words, the fear that you might just take the fun out of it, but that's not the case.
No, and that's kind of the big ethos behind our new approach to safety promotion is just trying to work, well, not work together, but to discuss it as a community, particularly with recreational pilots. What are the challenges we have together? On our fairly small safety promotion team, I'm involved in ballooning. We have a guy who's involved in helicopter flying. We have a GA pilot actually who's not so long ago gone through his instrument rating and actually also his instructor qualification, and has gone through a lot of this. So it's kind of interesting. I think it's important to have people in the team who are going through these same challenges, and I think understanding what it's like to be pilots and to be aviators, and as you say, not take you must all follow the rules, this is all terrible kind of approach, but saying, we understand there are difficult things, and how can, even, dare I say, we have this kind of fairly, let's say jokey phrase, but we have this statement where, in our part of the EASA, hello, I'm from the regulator and I'm here to help. And it's that kind of a thing. We have people that make rules, and that can sometimes be complicated and difficult. And all we want to do is understand what gets in the way of pilot, particularly recreational pilots, enjoying the flying as interestingly, as safely as possible. And how can we help in whatever way we can achieve that? Because that's what we're all trying to do.
I might tap in, if I can, for a moment, your early job in EASA and from the point of view of safety analysis. Let's use 3 words: knowledge, skill, attitude. Which is the big challenge for a pilot?
I think from a personal perspective, I think it often depends on the individual, if that makes sense. So I don't think, in a way, my answer would be that I don't think there's any one answer. I think it's kind of a balance of all of that, and how you then apply those different parts of aviation then to the decisions you make, if that makes sense. And
if you think about it, I mean, with flight testing and with standardization amongst instructors, most of the pilots flying out there will have the knowledge, and they'll probably have the skill, but the attitude is the one that sometimes is the challenge in safety, isn't it?
We certainly see that, and I think it's then the application of that's the challenge. Although one of the things we have, we do see quite often, certainly from my time in safety analysis, looking at accident reports, quite often is particularly, well, in fact, the knowledge and skills equally come in, particularly when you start looking at accidents. Thankfully, we have thousands and hundreds and thousands of flights every year where nothing bad happens. So when you start looking at the small subset of accidents, you do see things where, either accidents, in fact, there was one accident there's been some accidents. In fact, we did some safety promotion on it a while ago before COVID about electric trim runaway. And there's been, certainly we've seen some accidents and near miss occurrences where, from a basic knowledge perspective, is nobody imagined your aircraft would have a problem with a trim runaway. And do you know, as a pilot, where the circuit breaker is if you do have a system to disable it so that you don't end up fighting it while trying to look through the book that you might have in the cockpit that might tell you where it is, for example. So,
because that's the human factor, I suppose, that's coming into it as well. Because for anybody where something happens, they're going to be startled initially and lose a certain amount of thinking time. Yeah,
and I think that's, as I say, it's where the balance is. The more things, certainly what we see is the more people can look ahead to what they're going to do and think about, well, is there any extra knowledge I might need to go and find for this particular, flight I'm doing to a new location, or, if I'm doing something new, or there's something unusual that might happen. Yeah, there's so many of that. That's where we see, again, certainly in some of the accidents, it's those kinds of things that get people that have a lot of knowledge and have all the skills, and then it's kind of one small circumstance where something happens. I think, certainly even the most experienced pilots can kind of, just by virtue of the world being complicated, can find themselves in a situation they've never experienced before, where, there's difficult choices to make in a really short space of time. And how do they do that? And the more we can kind of, encourage that learning and, that discussion about, what are the different things we can all do together, then, hopefully it helps people when they find themselves in that situation.
For this year, you're taking a 2-pronged approach. We'll look at the second one in a moment, but you're saying something like, be an aviator and not just a pilot. What's that about?
So ironically, that comes very closely to what you were talking about attitude, and that attitude towards continual development and continual learning and continually thinking about, how the last flight I took, how did that go? What can I learn? Are there things that I can see from either talking to other pilots, or again, one of the things from our side is, what can we help the community to learn from occurrences, from accidents and things like that the message might not get to other pilots, and how can we do that? And then how, as individuals, can we kind of encourage people to be open and receptive to that kind of path of continual learning and continual kind of evolution and development? And that's kind of the idea that we're trying to bring in with that.
And how does that manifest itself at a practical level? Are you talking about, clubs and groups of pilots running seminars, running hangar talk sessions where they share stories? What's the best way for that to happen?
I think it's all, one of the big things we're focusing on is just conversations, discussions, pilots sharing experiences with each other. I love actually the pilot, the GA pilot in our team, Vendel. He flies at a couple of local flying clubs here in the Cologne area, and there's quite often different club nights and things going on. And it's so interesting for us to then have him come back to the team and back to the office and, did you know, asking us, did you know, pilots are having a huge problem with this, or there's been a particular weather challenge in this particular part of the local area recently that really impacts as we come in on approach at that local airport, or things like that. And it's great to get those discussions going. And I think the more pilots can talk to each other, share experiences, flying clubs can do those kinds of things. That's great. But again, what we don't want to do is kind of not mandate, but kind of say this is the solution. Everybody should go and do this thing. All we want to encourage is conversation and learning in whatever way works for either pilots as individuals or clubs or groups or whatever. And particularly from our side, is if there's anything, I often regret saying this, but if there's ever anything, I know people pilots always we get so many great ideas from other pilots and other people. And quite often I say, if there's something you wish we could provide to help a flying club or individual pilots in that discussion, please have people contact us. I'm fairly active on Facebook, our Facebook groups and Facebook pages, and we have our general aviation community. And similarly, we have a just safety promotion at EASA.europa.eu. We encourage people to email us and tell us how we can help facilitate those kinds of discussions.
It's not a bad complaint if people are annoying you for help and support. I suppose it's a good way of looking at it. The second thing on your agenda is around the area of aeronautical decision making, and I suppose when you think about it, that's such a central part of safety, isn't it? It's making the good decision or the bad decision.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things we see as a common factor when we look at accidents and analyse them is there's either a decision or a number of decisions in a chain that have built up to whatever situation. And again, the more we can kind of, arm people with the knowledge of what are the most common chains and what can people then learn and apply themselves when they go flying is one step. And then just generally is for us to make decisions more deliberately, perhaps, than we would particularly if we've been doing something for a long time. It's kind of interesting. I've realized the more we've been trying to write this down and talk about it, even when I drive a car now, I used to, where I live in Cologne, we have we live on a busy dual carriageway in a nice apartment block with just a parking space right in front of the building and the road. And it's really easy to kind of throw your seatbelt on and check and go. And actually, I find myself now in the car even, just getting myself ready. What am I going to do? I'm ready. I've done this. I've said, put where I'm going to go in the sat nav if I need to before going. And, it's those kinds of analogies in a sense, and just kind of thinking ahead more.
We'll be back in a moment after this short break. There's a lot of other things becoming available, I suppose, to pilots in feet, not just general aviation pilots as well, but things like additional technology in the cockpit and conspicuity, of course, being seen. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so interestingly, we had a workshop last week on eye conspicuity, specifically looking at the new U space. Where around kind of more likely around cities initially with drones flying around. But I think that certainly, in terms of technology, things are improving or things are changing, and there's technology opportunities coming into the cockpit for pilots at much reduced costs than they were before that do amazing things. And certainly one of the things at the heart of the EASA general aviation roadmap for quite a long time now has been really how can we facilitate getting technology into the cockpit for pilots as easily and cheaply and simply as possible, rather than saying, well, we have to wait 10 years to certify all of this to make sure it's perfect. Is it better that a pilot has, something that provides lots of extra safety and we really try and work hard to try and facilitate much more of this now. And I think the technology lends itself to that much more than perhaps it did even 3-4 years ago. It's amazing to see the pace of the technology.
It, of course, raises another little problem, which is that if people put too much of a dependence on it and they're flying along with their head down, there's some basic airmanship missing.
And I think that is one of the key things, is as we bring more of this in, is it's again, what's the most appropriate things for pilots to have in the cockpit? How can they not, overload themselves with too many things that then take away from the flying? And it's finding that balance. And it's been interesting to have one of our own team kind of, in fact, over the last 3-4 years since he's really been flying again much more regularly as a private pilot, kind of going on that journey of learning himself and coming back to the team and saying, I found these 2 other great new apps, but they were really distracting. And I realized I'd kind of maybe brought too much into the cockpit, and it stopped me doing this, and really looking out of the aircraft. And it was it's particularly interesting when he's flying with instructors and they're discussing this as they go through a flight, is what's that balance, and how can you, when's too much additional things in the cockpit? And the more we can share even our own experiences about that, the better.
It's interesting too, if you look at a comparison between the way, for example, a commercial pilot might decide, I'm not safe to fly, I'm too tired, or I'm emotionally not in the right frame of mind, and the old I am safe, am I safe? You're suggesting that pilots should have a little bit more awareness of resilience.
Yeah, and actually interesting, that's one of the things we start to realize is, well, not start to realize, but we're looking to see how we can apply. And again, testing ourselves and some other pilots we work with, is to take some of the basic principles from the commercial sector and see, well, what does a simpler version of that look like for a private pilot? And how can you take the principles of human factors, decision making, all these CRM principles and all of these things from the commercial world into the cockpit for a private pilot, or into the process of flying for a private pilot, in a way that makes it fun and interesting, and doesn't take huge amounts of time or lots of extra cost, and just kind of integrate those all together. So that's kind of what we're trying to do.
So if we've whetted people's appetite in terms of finding out more and putting the responsibility, maybe not necessarily on clubs, but on pilots themselves, what's your advice for them? What can they do over the next couple of weeks ahead of the flying season to get themselves fit and ready? So at an individual level, I think particularly one of the biggest things is just having a step back and thinking, how fresh are their skills? How happy they are. Are they to be in the cockpit by themselves, for the first time, for quite a long time, perhaps? Certainly it depends, different pilots in different situations, but, and if they haven't been, perhaps thinking about, having a flight with an instructor, or with another pilot, or, doing things so they're not on their own. And it's interesting, actually, when we talk about parallels with the commercial sector. I know certainly some of the airlines we work with in the commercial sector, they have some routes. There was one airline I was talking to, a small commuter airline in Europe, who fly to London City, and they say if they've got a pilot who hasn't flown in, they're current, but they haven't flown in a preset period of time, they can't fly a London City or to certain other airports if they haven't flown in the last X number of days. And it's that, taking that principle again and saying, well, at an individual level, it might be a really nice, lovely, clear day and everything's fine. But, if suddenly something happens, would I be comfortable to deal with certain things that might happen, having perhaps not flown for a few months, and, taking and then thinking, well, okay, if I might have some gaps, where might those gaps be? How can I practice? Are there, ironically, in fact, one of our, kind of senior managers in EASA, who's a long-time former test pilot, former European aerobatics pilot, and flown for more than 40 years, has said it's been interesting how
he found during COVID going to something like Microsoft Flight Simulator or other X-Plane or whatever, and kind of running through some common things in a kind of virtual world, in a virtual aircraft, before stepping in a cockpit again. And, again, sitting down and thinking, well, if there are some things that I might need to practice, again, stepping back and thinking, well, I could practice this and I could practice that. And actually, one of the things we're thinking about, we're trying to put together, we haven't got a chance for this year yet, but actually, hopefully for next year, is almost us having on, a little area perhaps with some practices you could do, some scenarios on Microsoft Flight Simulator or on X-Plane that pilots could go to and say, here are some, from the EASA/GA community that we've put together some scenarios that pilots could do before they get in the cockpit again at the start of the season, for example. And I think that's really important. They're really important things, just getting back in and thinking about where the gaps might be in their knowledge.
Well, what seems to be the case, if people are flying in a club environment, there's very likely there'll be sort of suggestions and regulations about currency. It's for the pilot who maybe has their own aircraft and isn't necessarily within a system like that I suppose you're looking to get to as well.
And that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, is how to reach pilots who aren't part of that bigger kind of network. And I can just go in and jump in the aircraft and get flying. I think certainly that's quite often, well, not quite often, but I guess in a number of accidents, when we read the full accident report, sometimes it seems to be there are it's pilots like that who go flying, don't interact with others so much, who find themselves in some of the more difficult situations. And of course, don't forget, from the 14th to the 25th of March, we're going to be running the Europe-wide General Aviation season opener. We've got online events happening throughout the course of both weeks, starting on Monday lunchtime, and then with sessions every evening covering, getting your aircraft ready. And we've got experts from pretty much all the major manufacturers talking about kind of some of the important kind of safety topics on different aircraft. We're going to be talking about decision making. We're going to be talking about looking back at accidents over the past 12 months and what can people learn. So if you go to the EASA event pages and look at GA season opener, that period 14th to the 25th of March, you can actually register for the first session, and then after that all of the others will be on our Together4Safety YouTube channel. So you can go to the EASA website. On the domains, we have general aviation and lots of resources there. And we also have the EASA General Aviation community, where there's lots of different resources. We also have now the Aviators Club Facebook page, where we post all of the latest things, and then also a Facebook group called General Aviation Europe, where we're encouraging more and more discussion, and we'll post all of our things in there, and hopefully that makes life as easy and accessible for as many people as possible in lots of different ways.
And you'll find details of that on flyinginireland.com, and we'll also put in details on the programme notes for this particular episode. John Franklin, EASA's Head of Safety Promotion, thank you for joining us on Squawk 7000.
Fantastic. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here.
To get the news first, subscribe now to Squawk 7000 on your favourite podcast platform.